Everything started when I decided to bring a little innovation to Lakeview Gardens, a condo where the rules are stricter than the walls of mansions. My name is Jackson Mitchell, and at 42, I thought I was just buying a house. But I ended up diving into a cold war with the most inflexible homeowners association I've ever met. Elizabeth Brooks, the HOA president, has run this place for 3 decades with a rulebook that looks more like a small country's constitution. Since I moved in, every single breath I took seemed to break some condo regulation. But it was one fine, or not so fine fine, that changed everything. One single leaf falling on my yard cost more than a dinner at a fancy restaurant. Little did they know that that fine would be the spark for a revolution that would transform not only Lakeview Gardens, but the very idea of living in a condo. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. As a tech executive, I'm used to facing challenges, but nothing prepared me for the red tape at Lakeview Gardens. Every morning, there was a new surprise waiting in my mailbox. Warnings and fines for increasingly absurd violations. The grass had to be exactly 4.5 centimeters high, no more, no less. The curtains had to be in colors approved by the committee, and even the schedule for watering plants was controlled as if we were in a military camp. At the last HOA meeting, I noticed Elizabeth Brooks' inner circle, all sitting in the front row like a royal court. Sarah Anderson, a retired college professor, was the only one who occasionally questioned the decisions, but her voice was always drowned out by the conservative majority. James Richardson, the nervous vice president, just nodded along like a gas station dummy. My presence there was like a stain on their perfect picture. They saw me as an intruder, a digital virus in their analog system. Richard Thompson and William Parker, 2 other businessmen my age, warned me about the situation when I moved in, but I thought they were exaggerating. Now, sitting in that stifling meeting room, I completely understood what they meant. What bothered me the most wasn't the rules themselves, but how selectively they were applied. While I was getting fined for a crooked branch on my tree, Elizabeth's own garden had irregularities that were conveniently overlooked. That's when I realized I needed to do something different, something that shook up the foundations of this outdated system. It all came to a head on a sunny Thursday, when I found a fine notice for a single leaf that had fallen in my yard overnight. The amount? $500. Elizabeth Brooks had gone way too far. I sat down in my office, staring out the window at my inadequate garden, and began to make a plan. As a tech entrepreneur, I learned that sometimes the best way to change a system isn't to fight it head-on, but to find creative loopholes. I spent the whole night reviewing the condo's rulebook, a 200-page document that seemed like it was written in the Middle Ages. Among all the regulations about fence colors and shrub heights, I noticed one interesting detail. There was absolutely nothing about artificial snow. During breakfast, Richard and William showed up for our weekly business strategy meeting. When I shared my idea, Richard almost choked on his coffee. A snow machine? You're crazy, Jackson. William, on the other hand, broke into a grin from ear to ear. It's brilliant. Totally within the rules, but completely out of the box. In the following weeks, I secretly worked with a team of engineers to develop a state-of-the-art artificial snow system. This wasn't going to be just any snow machine. It would be a silent, eco-friendly piece of equipment that you could control from your smartphone. The investment was considerable, but it was worth every penny to see the look on Elizabeth's face when she realized there was nothing she could do about it. Sarah Anderson, my progressive neighbor, caught me studying the technical plans in my yard. Instead of reporting me, she sat down beside me and offered some valuable suggestions. You know, Jackson, in 30 years of living here, I've never seen anyone stand up to Elizabeth like this. It was about time someone shook things up here. The installation happened in the early hours of the morning. Everything needed to be perfect for the big day. As the technicians made the final tweaks, I couldn't contain my excitement. Soon, Lakeview Gardens would experience a new kind of revolution, a white, icy revolution that would forever change the way people saw the condo rules. On the first day, I fired up the machine at 6 in the morning. The system started working quietly, creating a soft mist that soon turned into tiny snowflakes. In minutes, my yard transformed into a winter wonderland worthy of a postcard. The artificial snow perfectly covered the grass, the trees, and even that offending leaf that cost me $500. The reaction was immediate. Elizabeth Brooks showed up at my door, still in her bathrobe, her face bright red like a bell pepper. "What do you think this means, Mr. Mitchell?" I kept my cool and replied with a smile. "Just making sure my yard is perfectly white, Mrs. Brooks. Aren't there any rules against snow in the manual?" The neighborhood kids were the first to be enchanted. Soon, a small crowd had formed in front of my house. Parents tried unsuccessfully to keep their children from playing in the snow. Richard and William arrived with coffee and donuts, turning it all into an impromptu social event. James Richardson, the nervous HOA vice president, frantically flipped through the rulebook, desperately searching for any clause to use against me. This is just ridiculous, he stuttered, with beads of sweat running down his forehead despite the artificial chill. Sarah Anderson took the opportunity to organize a makeshift class explaining how snow crystals form for some curious kids. Her scientific explanation even attracted a few of the older residents, who began to see the situation in a new light. The news spread quickly. Residents of nearby condos began showing up to see the spectacle. Young people were snapping selfies. Local influencers did live streams, and soon my snowy yard became a social media sensation. Lakeview. Snow started trending regionally. Elizabeth tried to call an emergency HOA meeting, but for the first time in years, she couldn't get enough people to attend. The residents were too busy having fun in the snow. Even some members of her inner circle started questioning if all those strict rules even made sense. A week passed, and my snowy yard became the unofficial community hangout. We organized a snow sculpture festival, complete with awards for different categories. The most surprising moment was when Mrs. Jenkins, 75, took first prize with an impressive unicorn sculpture. Richard and William seized the moment to propose some changes to the condo rules. They circulated a petition to modernize the manual, making it more flexible and adapted to modern times. To our surprise, more than half of the residents signed up on the first day. Local media began to show up. Reporters were doing segments on how a simple snow machine was melting decades of tradition and uniting different generations. One newspaper even ran a headline, "Snowstorm of Changes: How a Tech Entrepreneur Revolutionized His Condo." What was most interesting was to see how something so simple was causing such a profound transformation. It wasn't just about snow or rules. It was about how a community could reinvent itself when someone had the courage to think differently. The HOA tried to strike back in every possible way. Elizabeth Brooks called in lawyers, regulatory experts, and even a meteorologist to try and find a legal reason to put an end to my icy demonstration. But every attempt just made the whole situation more ridiculous and drew even more attention. During a surprise inspection, Elizabeth brought in an energy conservation specialist to claim that my snow machine was sucking up too much electricity. Imagine his surprise when he found out the system ran on solar power and even generated excess energy for the grid. The specialist ended up asking me for my business card. Interested in investing in the technology, James Richardson attempted to argue that the artificial snow might damage the condo's landscaping. Sarah Anderson, drawing on her academic expertise, organized a detailed presentation showing how the composition of the artificial snow was completely safe and biodegradable. The meeting ended with James apologizing and quietly asking how much it would cost to install a similar system in his yard. Social media was exploding with videos and photos of the eternal snow condo, as we began to be called. Digital influencers lined up to record content in my garden. One of them, with over 1 million followers, did a live stream showing how a traditional condo was transforming through innovation. Richard and William started getting inquiries from other condo communities interested in modernizing their rules. We developed a digital guide on how traditional communities could adapt to modern times without losing their essence. The document went viral and was soon shared in condo administration groups all over the country. The most significant change happened when the neighborhood kids organized a petition demanding that the common area also get a snow machine. The document, written in childish handwriting and decorated with colorful drawings, was handed straight to Elizabeth during an HOA meeting. For the first time in years, I saw her speechless. Snow events began to attract people of all ages. We organized outdoor movie nights with people sitting on makeshift sleds. The ladies from the book club moved their meetings to my garden, discussing classic literature over hot chocolate. Even grumpy Mr. Peterson, who never left his house, was seen building a snowman with his grandchildren. The situation reached a critical point when an architecture and design magazine published an article on how my protest was revolutionizing the concept of landscaping in gated communities. The article highlighted how technology could be used to create unique experiences without breaking established rules. Elizabeth Brooks even started losing support among her closest allies. During one especially tense meeting, Mrs. Miller, her friend of 30 years, got up and declared, "Maybe it's time we admit that some changes are necessary. We can't stay stuck in the past forever." It was becoming clearer every day that there was no turning back. Lakeview Gardens was changing. and not even the strictest rulebook in the world could stop it. The artificial snow had become a symbol of something bigger, the need to balance tradition with innovation. Tensions reached their peak when a video of Elizabeth trying to measure the irregular height of the snowflakes went viral on social media. In a matter of hours, we became a national meme. TV hosts were commenting on the case, and even some local politicians began using our story as an example of how outdated regulations can stifle creativity and innovation. A crew from the country's most watched morning show showed up unannounced to do a live report. The host, charmed by the snow in the middle of summer, conducted interviews with residents. The most memorable moment was when Tommy, an 8-year-old boy, explained that thanks to the snow he finally met all his neighbors and made friends for the first time since moving into the condo. Sarah Anderson organized an educational event called Science in the Snow, where kids and adults learned about meteorology, physics, and chemistry through hands-on experiments. The initiative attracted local schools, and soon we began receiving educational visits on a regular basis. Elizabeth had to watch, helpless, as school buses rolled into the community 3 times a week. Richard and William seized the moment to present a revolutionary proposal: transform Lakeview Gardens into a model community that integrates technology and tradition. They suggested creating an innovation council where residents of all ages could propose improvements for the condo. The idea was immediately backed by 70% of the residents. The atmosphere in the condo changed drastically. Residents who barely exchanged greetings before began organizing events together. Mrs. Martinez, famous for her noise complaints, started hosting outdoor cooking classes in the snow. Mr. Davis, a retiree who used to collect complaints about the administration, became the official photographer for the events. The media started calling our case the Snow Revolution, an example of how small acts of creative rebellion can spark significant changes in traditionally rigid structures. Urban planning experts were citing our story in conferences, and other communities began questioning their own outdated rules. In a surprising twist, James Richardson secretly came to see me. "You know, Mitchell," he said, as nervous as ever, "I spent 30 years defending these rules, but I've never seen the condo so alive as it is now." He confessed that he was tired of just following Elizabeth and wanted to be a part of the change. The most surreal moment came when a delegation of presidents from other condos came to see our revolution in person. Elizabeth was forced to greet them, having to explain why she was so resistant to changes that clearly benefited the community. Her face turned even redder than usual when one of the visitors mentioned that his own condo was installing a snow machine that week. Social media just wouldn't stop buzzing about us. Hashtags like Snowstorm of Change and Lakeview Revolution generated millions of views. Digital influencers started a trend of visiting traditional condos and suggesting creative interventions inspired by our story. The transformation was irreversible. Lakeview Gardens had become a symbol of how communities can evolve without losing their identity. Every snowflake that fell seemed to carry a message. Sometimes the most profound change begins with a simple act of creative disobedience. The situation reached the point where Elizabeth Brooks could no longer control the narrative. On one particularly tense morning, she called an extraordinary assembly in a bid to regain control. The auditorium was packed, but not as usual. Besides the regular residents, there were journalists, representatives from other condos, and even an independent documentarian. Elizabeth took the stage with her usual authoritarian posture, but something was off. Her voice trembled slightly as she tried to list the damages caused by the snow machine. In the middle of her presentation, Sarah Anderson raised her hand and presented a detailed study showing how property values in the condo had increased by 15% since we became a social media sensation. Richard and William added data on how maintenance costs had dropped since residents started getting more involved in the community. "People take care of what they feel they belong to," explained Richard, showing some impressive charts on his tablet. The most impactful moment came when a 10-year-old girl named Sophie asked to speak. With surprising confidence, she explained how she used to spend afternoons alone at home playing video games, and now she had a group of friends to play with in the snow every day. "Why do you want to take away our happiness?" she asked, looking straight at Elizabeth. James Richardson, sweating more than usual, finally found his voice. He stood up and, for the first time in 15 years as vice president, publicly disagreed with Elizabeth. "We need to admit that being right doesn't always mean doing the right thing," he declared, earning applause from the audience. The meeting took an unexpected turn when residents began spontaneously sharing their stories about how the snow revolution had impacted their lives. Mr. Cooper, a reclusive widower, tearfully revealed how the social gatherings in the snowy garden helped him overcome his depression. Mrs. Wong showed photos of her grandson, who had traveled from another state just to experience our summer snow. Elizabeth tried one last move. She threatened to resign if we didn't go back to the old rules. To her surprise, instead of protests, there was a thoughtful silence followed by a few understanding nods. The power she wielded by instilling fear of change had melted away, just like snow in the sun. The live broadcast of the meeting on social media broke audience records for a condo event. Comments poured in from all over the country, with people sharing their own experiences with outdated regulations and celebrating our little revolution. At the end of the assembly, when Elizabeth realized that she had lost not only control, but also the trust of the residents, something unexpected happened. Sarah Anderson proposed the creation of a multi-generational advisory board to modernize the condo rules. The proposal was approved by acclamation. I watched it all from the back row, beside Richard and William. "You know what's ironic?" William commented. "All this time, Elizabeth was so focused on preserving the essence of Lakeview Gardens that she never realized the true essence was always the community, not the rules." The snow kept falling lightly outside, but now it represented something different. It wasn't just an act of rebellion anymore, but a symbol of how a community can reinvent itself without losing its soul. Elizabeth Brooks' resignation happened on a sunny Tuesday, exactly 2 months after the snow machine was installed. She handed in a formal letter, typed on letterhead, with the same formality that had governed the condo for 3 decades. Her final official act was a short speech where, surprisingly, she admitted that maybe it was time to pass the baton to a new generation. The transition was smoother than anyone could have expected. The new board, made up of a balanced mix of longtime residents and newcomers, immediately got to work modernizing the rules. Sarah Anderson took the lead on the Innovation Committee, with James Richardson as her vice, a partnership no one could have predicted just a few months earlier. Changes started to show up quickly. The rulebook was digitized and simplified. We created an app where residents could suggest improvements and vote on new proposals. The fine system was completely reformed, focusing more on education and awareness than on punishment. Richard and William developed a mentorship program where experienced residents shared knowledge with the younger ones while learning about technology and new trends. Mr. Peterson, for instance, held traditional gardening classes while learning to use social media from the building's teenagers. The snow machine kept running, but now it was just one of several innovations. We set up an intelligent community garden system, solar panels in the common areas, and even an educational weather station that the kids loved monitoring. One late summer afternoon, I found Elizabeth walking through the condo. To my surprise, she stopped by my garden and after a moment of hesitation said something I'll never forget. "You know, Mr. Mitchell, sometimes you need a snowstorm to clear the air and show us a new perspective." Then, for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled genuinely. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The transformation of Lakeview Gardens became a case study at universities and the subject of special news features. Delegations from other condos started visiting us regularly, eager to understand how we managed to balance tradition and innovation so harmoniously. Sarah Anderson, with her academic background, developed a consulting program to help other communities in a similar transition. Our story inspired a national movement for modernization in traditional condos. Lakeview Effect became synonymous with positive change through technology and intergenerational dialogue. Richard and William were invited to speak at conferences about condo management, sharing our transformation experience. The most rewarding part was seeing how small changes created huge impacts. The book club now streamed their meetings online for members who couldn't attend in person. The kids even created a digital newsletter for the condo. Even grumpy Mr. Peterson started a YouTube channel about gardening, with technical help from the building's teenagers. James Richardson, now serving on the advisory board, discovered a knack for conflict mediation. His anxiety dropped significantly when he realized that not all change was a threat. He began organizing workshops on effective communication in multi-generational communities. One afternoon, while watching children playing in the artificial snow next to seniors taking a Tai Chi class, I realized we had created something bigger than just a protest. We turned a generational battleground into a living lab of coexistence and innovation. Although Elizabeth Brooks was no longer in charge, she continued to live in the condo. Gradually, she started joining community events, first timidly, then with growing enthusiasm. At one of the book club meetings, she surprised everyone by suggesting we read a sci-fi novel, a small change that symbolized a much bigger transformation. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.